Hi, sophomores. Hopefully you finished part 3 last week. I know I didn't finish it all, but you were able to read the big fight scene between Lenny and Curly. So now we're on page 66, and we're going to be learning about crooks. Just remember, there probably will be a lot of the N-word used here, and it's used on purpose. You'll notice that the narrator never calls him the N-word, and you'll notice other characters who don't call him an N-word. So just like in Mockingbird, it's really important to notice who uses that word and who doesn't, because that's where the importance lies. Here we go. Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room there was a square, four-paned window, and on the other a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crooks's bunk was a long box filled with straw on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself a little bench for leather-working tools, curved knives and needles and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge, and scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he'd accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun. And he had books, too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. The room was swept and fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips, which were lighter than his face. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth champing on hay, of the rattle of halter chains. In the stable buck's room, a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans and back. In one hand he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other he rubbed his spine. Now and then he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the open doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes he stiffened and a scowl came over his face. His hand came out from under his shirt. Lenny smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." Lenny gulped and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy, and I seen your light," he explained. "Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on, get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." "Why ain't you wanted?" Lenny asked. "'Cause I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play 'cause I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I tell you, all of you stink to me." Lenny flapped his big hands helplessly. "Everybody went into town," he said. "Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in no trouble. I seen your light." "Well, what do you want?" "Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and sit." Crooks stared at Lenny, and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. "I don't know what you're doing in the barn anyway," he complained. "You ain't no Skinner. There's no call for a bucker to come into the barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses." "The pup," Lenny repeated. "I come to see my pup." "Well, go see your pup then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted." Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room, then remembered and backed out the door again. "I looked at him a little. Slim says I ain't to pet him much." Crooks said, "Well, you been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady don't move him someplace else." "Oh, she don't care. She lets me." Lenny had moved into the room again. Crooks scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. "Come on in and sit a while," Crooks said. "Long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well sit down." His tone was a little more friendly. All the boys gone into town, huh? All but old Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse sharpening his pencil and sharpening and figuring. Crooks adjusted his glasses. Figuring? What's Candy figuring about? Lenny almost shouted, About the rabbits! You're nuts, said Crooks. You're crazy as a wedge. What rabbits you talking about? The rabbits we're gonna get, and I get to tend 'em, cut grass and give 'em water, and like that. Just nuts, said Crooks. I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight. Lenny said quietly, It ain't no lie. We're gonna do it. Gonna get a little place and live off the fat of the land. Crooks settled himself more comfortably in the bunk. Sit down, he invited. Sit down on the nail keg. Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. You think it's a lie, Lenny said, but it ain't no lie. Every word's the truth, and you can ask George. Crooks put his dark chin into his pink palm. You travel around with George, don't you? Sure. Me and him goes every place together. Crooks continued. Sometimes he talks, and you don't know what the hell he's talking about. Ain't that so? He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talks on, and you don't know what the hell it's all about. Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crooks leaned forward over the edge of the bunk. I ain't a Southern Negro, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch, about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I went to play with them, and some of 'em was pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. I never knew till long later why he didn't like that. But I know now. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't another colored family for miles around, and now there ain't a colored man on this ranch, and there's just one family in Soledad. He laughed. If I say something, why, it's just a nigger saying it. Lenny asked, How long you think it'll be before them pups will be old enough to pet? Crooks laughed again. A guy can talk to you and be sure you won't go blabbing. Couple weeks and them pups will be all right. George knows what he's about. Just talks, you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just a nigger talking, and a busted back nigger, so it don't mean nothing, see? You couldn't remember it anyways. I seen it over and over. A guy talking to another guy, and it don't make no difference if he don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking, or they're settin', still not talking. Don't make no difference, no difference. His excitement had increased till he pounded his knee with his hand. George can tell you screwy things, and it don't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy. That's all. He paused. Okay, so right here, you see Crooks's loneliness. He talks about how he's not a Southern black, which means he wasn't a slave, and his dad wasn't a slave. California didn't really have slaves. So he's always been used to being free, and when he was a kid, he played with other white kids. He didn't really understand the racial divide until he got older. And now he's completely alone. He's isolated on this farm, on this ranch. And now Lenny is there and visiting with him, and he's so excited because for the first time somebody's listening to him. And he knows Lenny's not going to repeat anything. He knows Lenny doesn't understand it. He just gets to finally talk to somebody. But what we're going to see is Crooks's cruelty come out from being so alone. His voice grew soft and persuasive. S'pose George don't come back no more. S'pose he took a powder and just ain't coming back. What'll you do then? Lenny's attention came gradually to what had been said. What? He demanded. I said, s'pose George went into town tonight and you never heard of him no more. Crooks pressed forward some kind of private victory. Just s'pose that, he repeated. He won't do it, Lenny cried. George wouldn't do nothing like that. I've been with George a long time. He'll come back tonight. But the doubt was too much for him. Don't you think he will? Crooks' face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Nobody can tell what a guy'll do, he observed calmly. Let's say he wants to come back and can't. Suppose he gets killed or hurt so he can't come back. Lenny struggled to understand. George won't do nothing like that, he repeated. George is careful. He won't get hurt. He ain't never been hurt 'cause he's careful. Well, just suppose he don't come back. What'll you do then? Lenny's face wrinkled with apprehension. I don't know. Say, what you doing anyways? He cried. This ain't true. George ain't got hurt. Crooks bored in on him. Want me to tell you what'll happen? They'll take you to the booby hatch. They'll tie you up with a collar like a dog. Just so you guys know, booby hatch is a euphemism here for a mental hospital. It's not like a brothel or anything. Suddenly, Lenny's eyes centered and grew quiet and mad. He stood up and walked dangerously toward Crooks. "Who hurt George?" he demanded. Crooks saw the danger as it approached him. He edged back on his bunk to get out of the way. "I was just s'posin'," he said. "George ain't hurt. He's all right. He'll be back all right." Lenny leaned over him. "What you s'posin' for? Ain't nobody gonna s'pose no hurt to George." Crooks removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his fingers. "Just sit down," he said. "George ain't hurt." Lenny growled back to his seat on the nail keg. "Ain't nobody gonna talk no hurt to George," he grumbled. Crooks said gently, "Maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's going to come back. S'pose you didn't have nobody. S'pose you couldn't go into the bunkhouse and play rummy 'cause you was black. How'd you like that? S'pose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you could play horseshoes till it got dark, but then you got to read books. Books ain't no good. A guy needs somebody to be near him," he whined. "A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is, long as he's with you. I tell you," he cried, "I tell you a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick." "George gonna come back," Lenny reassured himself in a frightened voice. "Maybe George come back already. Maybe I better go see." Okay, so here we have this repeated theme of friendship. We've heard Slim talk about how important it is for guys to be in friendship with each other or they get mean. Crooks says a guy will get too lonely and then he gets sick. Curly has said that he gets lonely. Okay, and you're going to have at least one more character bring up the idea of being lonely. And all they feel like they need is just one person. And you'll notice that they each talk about that to Lenny. Okay, so Lenny represents this idea of community, even without being equals with somebody intellectually, that he can still be there for them and be a friend. So it's this beautiful idea of what friendship really is, that it's not about being identical or being equal. It's just about having somebody be there and be physically present with you. Crooks said, I'm on 73, "I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was talking about myself. A guy sets out alone here at night, maybe reading books or thinking or stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking, and he ain't got nothing to tell him what's so and what ain't so. Maybe if he sees something, he don't know whether it's right or not. He can't turn to some other guy and ask him if he sees it too. He can't tell. He's got nothing to measure by. I seen things out here. I wasn't drunk. I don't know if I was asleep. If some guy was with me, he could tell me I was asleep, and that would be all right. But I just don't know." Crooks was looking across the room now, looking toward the window. Lenny said miserably, "George wouldn't go away and leave me. I know George wouldn't do that." The stale buck went on dreamily. "I remember when I was a little kid on my old man's chicken ranch. Had 2 brothers. They was always near me, always there. Used to sleep right in the same room, right in the same bed, all 3. Had a strawberry patch. Excuse me. Had an alfalfa patch. Used to turn the chickens out in the alfalfa on the sunny morning. My brothers sat on the fence rail and watch 'em. White chickens they was." Gradually, Lenny's interest came around to what was being said. "George says we're going to have alfalfa for the rabbits." "What rabbits?" "We're going to have rabbits and a berry patch." "You're nuts." "We are too. You ask George." "You're nuts." Crooks was scornful. "I seen hundreds of men come by on the road and the ranches with their bindles on their back and that same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of 'em. They come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of 'em's got a little piece of land in his head, and never a goddamn one of 'em ever gets it. Just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out here. Nobody never gets to heaven, and nobody gets no land. It's just in their head. They're all the time talking about it, but it's just in their head." He paused and looked toward the open door, for the horses were moving restlessly and the halter chains clinked. The horse whinnied. "I guess somebody's out there," Crooks said. "Maybe Slim. Slim comes in sometimes 2-3 times a night. Slim's a real skinner. He looks out for his team." He pulled himself painfully upright and moved toward the door. "That's you, Slim?" he called. Candy's voice answered. "Slim went into town. Say, you seen Lenny?" "You mean the big guy?" "Yeah, seen him around any place?" "He's in here," Crooks said shortly. He went back to his bunk and lay down. Candy stood in the doorway, scratching his bald wrist and looking blindly into the lighted room. He made no attempt to enter. "Tell you what, Lenny, I've been figuring out about them rabbits, Crooks said irritably. You can come in if you want. Candy seemed embarrassed. I don't know. Of course, if you want me to. Come on in. If everybody's coming in, you might just as well. It was difficult for Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. All right, so that's where I'm going to pause on the reading. Notice that last line, Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. What is he happy about? Well, he's happy he's got people in his room now. He's not alone. So he's pretending to cover it up with anger, like, oh, everybody's invading my space, but secretly he's really happy that he's not alone. All right, so I want you to finish this chapter. Let's see how many pages you've got left. 8 pages. Okay? 8 pages left, and then after that, we've got one more week of the book, and we're going to move on. Okay. This week's assignment is a Kahoot. There will be the option for you to do the Kahoot on your own, or for you to do it with me and with your fellow classmates during our class period on Thursday. I would love for you to join us on Thursday, get to see everybody, and kind of just play the game with us. But if you're busy on Thursday or you don't think you can do it on that time, just make sure you get it done before then. All right, I miss you. I love you.